Hello, everybody. Welcome to Where's the Line, where we explore the gray areas of life. Excited to have another episode with you all. I'm here joined by my co-host, Jane Liu. And today we have a very special guest, and we're going to be talking about where's the line when managing in a remote world and how to manage remotely without micromanaging. So especially coming out of the pandemic, this is a very relevant topic. Dmitrii Pokhil, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dmitrii, so thank you for making time today. We'd love for you to introduce yourself a little bit and give us a little bit of background about what you do, where you've come from, etc.
Sure. So about a decade I spent within the automotive industry. I went to school for mechanical engineering. I was torn between going to industry as my parents kind of went into higher education. So do I go into industry right away or do I continue staying in school? But I got excited, jumped feet first or head first, and got right into the workforce. Landed a job at a really cool company that worked with cars. I love cars, and I spent almost a decade there. I was a mechanical design engineer throughout the decade, right, rising from a junior to a senior mechanical design engineer. But it was interesting because as somebody straight out of college, I was assigned anywhere from 1 to 3 designers that would be actually doing the design work of creating the drawings and actually creating the 3D models of the products we were developing. And off the bat, it was kind of an odd sensation where I was this just young kid straight out of college that didn't really know anything other than the textbook stuff I studied. And now having this whole wide range of anybody from 20 to 60 years old that was effectively kind of reporting to me as they were leaning on me for the work they were doing. A recruiter approached me just through LinkedIn for a medical startup company, conveniently just down the road from my old company. So it wasn't even a concern or any remote location change. And there we are bioengineering organs. And the idea was thrilling. I have a passion. Ideally, I would have wanted to be a doctor as I really want to help people, but that's not my skill set or my mindset for that matter. But here is a directly applicable position that I was introduced to that I could help facilitate something that could eventually help people. And the role I got put in was I was a process development engineer with the idea that I would be growing out the engineering team as necessary as the company continued growing out. And now I'm the manager of engineering and facilities at the company with a small team from controls engineers to data engineers to quality engineers, as well as facility engineer, I guess.
Yeah, and that's super good context. I'm wondering, and I would love to hear from everybody here, what's been your experience with in-person work, transitioning to remote or hybrid? Dmitrii, maybe we start with you and then Sabrina, and I'm happy to chime in too. What's been your experience, Dmitrii?
Starting with remote work, it was initially kind of exciting. I could sleep in half an hour more. All my meetings, any meetings I had, initially nobody actually used the camera, which was awesome because that meant I could just literally roll out of bed, pour a cup of coffee, and hop right onto anything as early as like a 6 a.m. meeting. I just had to sound like I was awake. I didn't have to look like I was awake. But then it started pretty quickly on. It started like being apparent that it was a lot harder to concentrate for myself as there was nobody around me that I could see. It's kind of like when you go to the gym, essentially. I find it easier to work out at a gym than be at home because I see everybody else kind of working hard, and now I want to work hard. And I had that given. I also tried working out at home, and that only lasted about a month. It was not a success for me, but work, you adapt, of course, and the whole idea is wanting to be successful. So
Sabrina, what about you?
Yeah, so I moved from a full in-office to remote. And then in my most recent transition, when I started a new job, I was fully remote, and also onboarding remotely was very new to me and interesting. So I'm the only one that's working out of the Midwest. And what I did appreciate, though, about my experience was that my manager was really open right at the beginning to set standards and expectations with me and ask about my preferences, my work style, my working hours. So I had that experience, which has been really refreshing because I didn't know what to expect. So yeah, so far so good, but I do miss in-office time for sure. I would prefer, in an ideal world, hybrid, but here we are. It's okay.
Yeah. I've had a variety of different experiences as well. I started in consulting where I was traveling Monday to Thursday to a client site where then I was in office with my customer. And then on Fridays, I would work from home. We would have an office like locally in Chicago, but nobody really went to the office on Fridays. And then I went into like full in-person at LinkedIn, and it was like the 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. There was a little bit of flexibility depending on the time, the team that you're on and the manager that you're working with. But generally the expectation is that you're in the office. And then, yeah, when the pandemic hit, we were remote. We were saying you're remote for 2 weeks, and then psych, it's been multiple years now. And so at this point, I would say I'm probably 90 to 95% remote. And honestly, Dmitrii, when you're talking about how you don't have to commute anymore, like that's been my biggest thing that I really benefited from. I hate commuting, and not having a commute saves me so much time. I have a lot more flexibility, and I've actually quite enjoyed working from home. But in reality, I actually think I find myself working during the time that I would be commuting. So I'm actually extending my day a little bit longer. But yeah, that's been my experience so far. And I guess I'm wondering, Dmitrii, from your experience remote managing, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've experienced so far?
It's always hard to know like when work's getting done if there's no specific evidence.
Mhm.
Like we've all used a shared Word document or shared Google document. And if somebody contributes, you can see this person contributed or whatever it might be. But if it's, especially if it's in a discipline that I'm not like the expert in, and they're working on a certain problem that I have this preconceived notion that should only take less than a week, but then I'm not seeing results at the end of that week type of deal. And I start questioning, like, have they been working or not? Or is this just more challenging? But when it gets to that point, one of the things I've always stressed with my employees is transparency, and to just be forward, not be concerned to bring up when something is taking a little bit more time. I'm not going to question that it's going to take more time. More so, I get concerned if it does seem like they're just sitting around not doing anything. But that's kind of the balance of trust.
It's not that you don't, it's not that you're not seeing progress. Is if something is taking longer, as long as they are communicating and open and transparent with you, it's all good. But if they're not sharing how much progress they're making or what the bottleneck or issue is, it's harder for you to gauge whether or not progress is being made.
Yeah, and one of the other ones is for certain things, we'd set timelines, and I would have them set a timeline. This is how long I would expect these tasks or this project to take. And when the timelines start slipping, and when we follow up on what was like, was this more difficult? I want to better understand so I can better appreciate next time we have a similar project to set my expectations on timing wise. But when I've had issues is when they don't really have any good reasoning potentially on why it took longer. It was just, that's the time when it makes it a lot more difficult to actually, like, is remote work being effective during that time?
Yeah, no, those are really great points. And as I'm distilling this down for audience, I think that's really helpful. So if I'm hearing you correctly, it's a lot about sort of communication, right? Being transparent, and in terms of timelines, like setting those expectations. But even if something doesn't get done in that way, or in that timeline, they should at least give a post-mortem reasoning, right, on why they would adhere to that.
Yeah, it's not, and there's like a line of micromanagement there too. Like, I'm not trying to just sit on them and question, like, why did you lose a few minutes here? Why did this take a few minutes more? No, it's absolutely not that. It's when there's these gross whether very well could be a miscommunication on my end or misunderstanding. I simply, to be a better manager, I want to actually understand their work. And obviously I'm not going to be an expert. That's why we have a team. We have experts in the individual fields, or maybe, and for me to be able to manage it effectively, I'd want to know as much of the full picture as possible. But when it's like when you're putting a puzzle together and you're missing that one piece, you kind of wonder where the heck it went.
Absolutely. So on that note, then, what have you found has worked well in terms of managing the workers without micromanaging? Like, or are there certain things you've tested? Or is it just that in the remote world, we may need to micromanage more? But what's been your approach?
The expectation is they're the ones going to be doing the work, and we don't have infinite amount of time to do the work because we're trying to quickly do sprints at work. So it's, again, continued communication. It doesn't have to be a daily communication, it doesn't have to be hourly by any means, but there is an expectation that the work gets done, like any company, and the work needs to be done in a timely manner. And at one, you can gauge when certain people take timeliness seriously. There's some it's weirdly apparent when the various amount of people I've worked with that understand that this due date is important, versus people are like, well, maybe I'll walk around the due date and maybe I'll get you a week or two later type of deal. And if it becomes repetitive, that's when it's a concern. Obviously, if slips here and there, nobody's perfect by any means, nor is anybody perfect at estimating time. There's hurdles and issues that can come up, or who knows, maybe something happened at home that delayed them. But that's why we talk through these things.
So it's more of that, like, the people who are accountable are more likely to continue to keep you informed as they progress, whereas a lot of people could almost use this as an excuse to say, like, oh, I cannot finish it, and there really wasn't a real reason behind that.
Starting in elementary school, there's been accountability to getting things done on time. It's just kind of something you've learned across your life. Yeah, sure, some people did better than others, but there's always awareness to having the accountability.
Obviously, yes. In school, we should all have learned that accountability matters and deadlines matter. But if you have someone that doesn't have that, do you think it's even feasible to give them the grace and teach them, or are these skills that just cannot really be taught?
I don't know. That's a tough one. That's one that I've struggled with a lot, because I've had that where you keep encouraging, keep pushing with the expectation that it's going to get better. But we're at a certain point in life where teaching an old dog new tricks, it's not necessarily that by any means, as we're always able to learn. But it's when at one point it's something that's kind of been a habit in your life. If you've never been that motivated to try getting things done way ahead of time, like, there's people that do things last minute, or there's people that kind of do it over the whole period of time that they've been assigned it. But people that are comfortable with missing deadlines, that's in the workplace, it's likely something that carries over from earlier education or wherever they may have previously worked, or whatever it might be. I honestly think it's mostly breaking a habit, and that habit, as we continue aging, habits are harder to break. Or if it's a new employee, there's you have to have some sort of grace to it as you're trying to learn them as well as they're learning who you are. But eventually the patience kind of runs out, I guess.
Yeah,
It can run out.
that's fair. Do you think, as a manager of a team, having shifted to a remote world, that you also needed to try to develop more like different skills that maybe you didn't need to have as a manager in an in-person world? And I'm thinking, just as one example, let's say when you're in person, you might be able to identify somebody's performance based on what you observe, right? Like you're literally there with them. So you kind of see what they're working on. Are they delivering on certain things? How long are they working, et cetera? So it's more natural just being in person. Whereas say now you're managing in a remote world, you have to develop certain skills of identifying somebody's performance or building trackers that really isn't like, but it helps, have that documentation of progress. Like, do you find that there's been a shift in how you identify or determine somebody's performance for in-person versus remote?
It sounds pretty, like, I guess, negative and pessimistic in a sense of needing to read somebody, but eventually it's kind of when you're meet anybody in the world, in a sense where you can read them to see if this person actually has good intent or ill intent. And even with the workplace, you can there's certain hints when you start realizing that, oh, they might not actually be doing quite as much work as you might think they are. But the people that are high performing, there's never been this kind of sensation or concerning internal feeling of they're not doing their work. It's always, I don't know, it's kind of this like subliminal feeling that you have.
I think that's fair. Like, I hate to use this word, but sometimes you just get a vibe. You just get a vibe from someone. I hate, because ultimately, like, that is not how you should measure a particular, person or somebody on your team. But I completely understand where you're coming from, because sometimes it is very obvious. I guess that takes me to kind of my next question. And Sabrina and Dmitrii, would love to hear from your perspective of, I guess, are there people who are maybe slackers who are pretending to be busy? And so there's like paper trails or evidence of work, but they're not hitting certain metrics, or they're not, or maybe vice versa, right? Same question can be high performers who are not working a regular 9 to 5. They could just be more efficient during the hours that they're working. So it doesn't seem like they're working as many hours as somebody else, but they could totally be achieving the metrics that you've set out for the team. So I guess the question is, have you experienced that? How do you identify those team members? Or Sabrina, even in our situation, like, how do we identify those peers?
So essentially you're setting the bar too low in a sense. The only way I could see, or I've seen, I guess, that measured is when they start bringing more additional things to the table, where all the work's been done and now they're searching for additional work, or they're actually creating work themselves that is very useful, or actually just further expands on the work that they were doing beyond what was initially scoped. And that's something I would consider very much a person that would be a high performer.
I was gonna touch on that because I was gonna challenge you at first. I was as about to say, like, work smarter, not harder, right? Like, why would I, if I was working for maybe less than 40 hours a week, but I would hit all of my goals, all of the deliverables on time, and all that. But I do, what you just said inspired me, I guess. That will set apart a regular performer from a high performer, right? Like, once you are done with that, are you seeking out other projects or being more innovative and all that? But again, where's the line then, right? Like, because you could also argue, why would that person go another extra mile if they already hit all of their goals, right? So it's really tough.
Yeah. One thing I do want to mention, and it's been said a couple of times, like, by no means do I measure anybody if 40 hours a week, that's expectation, sure. And if they work those 40 hours a week, and you can very much easily excel within even less than 40 hours a week. You don't need to be working 60-hour days or 60-hour weeks. Impossible to do a 60-hour day, 60-hour weeks to be truly somebody that excels. I've worked with people that did work excessive hours, and it was kind of amazing how little work they actually got done in those 60 hours compared to people that really excelled and seemed to get twice as much work done in half that time.
And this is to play devil's advocate, but what about people who don't prioritize work? Because I think, Dmitrii, one of the things that what I'm hearing is like the eagerness of or the caring about the work is really important. And you mentioned like innovation is really important for you and how it's part of how you define like success for your team. It's this fact of like, yes, you are doing your day-to-day job, but are you bringing new ideas to the table? Are you innovating? Are you like almost like leading the team with ideas? Can you talk to me about people who purely see it as a job of like, hey, I'm just doing my job. I'm doing my 9 to 5. I'm completing my what is expected of me. I have a family or other things that I'm prioritizing beyond like bringing more to the table. How do you, as potentially their manager, assess those types of team members who, don't have interest in bringing more to the table beyond what is expected of them?
Mm-hmm. No, there's absolutely a place for people that are just want to do the work that's expected of them. There's not always a necessity to have somebody that's always exceeding in performance. Sometimes it's obviously desired. The highest performing, highest exceeding, somebody that's always just doing way more work than you'd want necessarily ask for is great, but can't necessarily come in with that expectation. That's who you'd be having. Tends to burn people out for that matter, if that's the expectation that they're trying to live to.
Right.
And in terms of high performers, do you see a shift there from like pre-pandemic or even in the last year since you started managing remotely? Like, are we seeing less high performers because maybe people are prioritizing different things now in life? Or is that like, is there a trend that you're seeing on your team?
I can't attest to a trend specifically. I haven't seen that, I guess, that I can attribute to the pandemic or remote work. People that are, I think, have a passion for the work they're doing, that are in general just very motivated individuals, remained unaffected by the pandemic. Sure, like I find myself to be somebody that's very motivated and passionate for the work, but yeah, I had some slumps here and there through the pandemic where it was trying to get my footing on this just new routine that I'm in. So used to getting up at 5:30 or so in the morning, taking the dog for a walk, showering, packing up, sitting in the car for 30 minutes, and breaking that routine can have just the quick, fairly impactful psychological effect on people. And it's kind of like when you go on vacation, you're a little bit lost initially on what's going on when you don't have that typical routine you wake up to.
I feel like because I have a trusting relationship with my manager, he knows that I will get my work done. Like if I need to work outside of my regular work hours to prioritize something else, and I know that if something cannot be done, like Dmitrii, to what we talked about, I will let my manager know much ahead, like, hey, this is going to get delayed because of XYZ, or I have a personal, and I think I'm lucky because I have a good relationship with my manager for me to be open about if there are other things in my life that needs to take priority. But I guess, Dmitrii, one question for you is, as a manager who have had experience managing remotely or have had experience with folks who are struggling to work remotely or be communicative, if an individual contributor on your team needs more help or needs an extension or needs whatever, like just more support, how would you want them to approach you? I know you shared a little bit earlier about you're very open to the idea of like, hey, come to me with thoughts, with ideas, with things. But what is kind of your experience? Like, how do you how do you want your team to come to you when they need more?
Yeah, well, like as a manager, I've always stressed is I'm open-minded and want to be as transparent as possible. I'm never going to, it's like people say that there's no stupid question, but it's always just need to have the level of comfort where it might not necessarily be your best friend that I want you sharing all my secrets with, but I do want you to come to me, tell me if maybe there's something in life you're having a hard time with, so it's impacting your work. And mental health is one of the most important things that we found, I think, during the pandemic, is a balance of work and your just sanity. And as a manager, I think it's really important to be able to connect with your employees on more than just is your work getting done level type of deal. And if your work didn't get done, what's the problem with your work? But connect with them on just understanding, are they happy doing what they're doing? And if they're not, it's going to be a downward spiral with the work that their performance, for that matter.
Yeah. No, it's really refreshing to hear you talk about sort of the culture that you want to create and how you care about sort of mental health, right? And connecting with them while still upholding some sort of boundary. So it's really beautiful to hear you sort of create that culture. And on that note, I guess you mentioned a few things, but any other best practices to create a culture of trust for someone maybe that is starting to now manage in a remote world, for someone that may be more of a novice to this? So obviously you said things like communication, transparency, but if there's anything else sort of that what you would tell them if they were to start in this world.
The biggest thing is that as a manager, you never want to be a hypocrite. You always, again, as a manager or as a leader, it's not a manager, but you're leading, and it's showing by example. You don't necessarily, again, as a leader, you don't need to be working twice as hard as your employees to show the example that you must work this hard, but it's showing constant good practice and constantly trying to help them. As a result, they can help you because the team, that as a whole team, you're working together on this. Yeah,
that's, I think, such a good point. Like, authenticity is key, right? Who are we? We can't fake for too long. So, and that's not doing ourselves a favor. And something that I really appreciate about my managers, to reiterate, it was that when we did form that relationship right at the beginning, he did set those standards with me, but with me, it was coming from a place of, hey, this is what I prefer from my own, what is your like working style? What are your preferences, right? So having that open communication for me, or for him to create a very safe space for me to not feel judged, that was really key, and be vulnerable enough to share that this is what I prefer and this is what maybe we should still work on, and then continuously checking in on that too, right? Like every quarter or so, hey, has something changed in your life? Like, I feel like those regular check-ins could be key as well. Jane, anything on your end?
I want to double down on checking in. I feel like this is one of those things that didn't happen to me as much when we were in person, because I think it was more obvious if somebody is having personal issues where they need to like excuse themselves from being in the office. So you can more easily tell as the manager, like, hey, this person needs to go address this personal thing more frequently. Whereas now in a remote world, like if we're not chatting live on a call, you have no idea what this person is doing. So they could be out dealing with a family matter and you would have no idea. And I feel like, Sabrina, to your point, one of the things I've really appreciated about my current manager is he's very good about checking in. Like, he checks in all the time. And sometimes it could be about the job and like the actual deliverable of like, okay, how are we tracking against XYZ, which I think is a great question to ask and fair. But he also asks a lot about like, how am I doing from a mental health perspective? He will check in about, how do you feel about your career so far? Like, do you feel like you're gaining the skills or making progress towards like whatever job you would want as the next thing? Or, like checking in on other components of life. And Sabrina, this, like, I'm splitting my time doing like almost like doing two jobs at this moment. And my manager is always saying like, okay, how are you feeling? Do you feel like you're juggling too many things? Like, right, like really tailoring the checking in to whoever they're meeting with. I know that means a lot to me because I find that in the beginning, I was really uncomfortable sharing with him how I'm actually feeling. But because it became a routine, at least from my experience, I feel like I have been able to be more vulnerable with him. But I think it took a ton of tries from him towards me to be able to get there. So yeah, maybe like the conclusion of all of this is like it's up for to both the individual contributor to open up and be more communicative in this world, but also it is also partially the manager's role to create a community of trust, keep pushing on the checking in component, like without micromanaging, but really caring about your employee and keep trying, even if somebody may not be fully ready to be open yet. I think is really important. I do want to ask, I know we talked a lot about like managers identifying high performers or people who are struggling. What about like, do we have any recommendations for individual contributors? Because I know earlier we talked about how a lot of our audience are individual contributors. So Sabrina, Dmitrii, any thoughts there? How can individual contributors kind of flourish in a remote world?
Yeah, I can start, and then Dmitrii, if you want to add, because I'm an individual contributor, so I guess what I really learned was to, yes, be open, be communicative, and share, but also set my boundaries. And I think at the beginning, I was afraid maybe to do that, but the more that I learned that my manager is creating that safe community with me, or that safe space, I also needed to let them know, like, this is when I wasn't feeling well, right? And setting expectations that maybe I may meet the deliverable, but not in the timeline that he or they expected. So just setting boundaries for yourself, but then being open enough to share. I think it's just so key. So I would say to individual contributors, don't feel bad. Like, this is a tough life. We just came out of years of a pandemic. We're juggling so many different things. And mental health is, yeah, as Dmitrii shared, it is so important, but it's also gone way down, right, in terms of how we've all been doing. And I've actually been even open enough with my manager to say that I have therapy every Tuesday. And not to say that everyone needs to do that, but it's like something where, yes, I'm working on myself. And in order for me to be more productive, I'm taking the time to do therapy and things like that. So I'm hoping that everyone can create that and then feel safe enough to speak up to their manager in that way. But yeah, that was key, setting those boundaries and not feeling bad, I guess.
I think you hit actually a point that I'm like realizing now is there really hasn't been much precedence in how to work in a remote world. Like, I feel like there's a lot of precedence for how to work in an office. Like, we all know the etiquettes, we all know like what to do, how to show up in a certain way, but like nobody taught me how to work in a remote, right? Like, a lot of the skills we keep going back to, what are the skills? Communicating, transparency. Like, yes, that is important in a in-person world, but we never had to do that at the level that we're needing to do that now. And I feel like there's just no precedence. Like, nobody trained us on how to do this. We were just kind of thrown into this new style of working. And all of a sudden it's like managers have to figure out how to manage effectively. Individual contributors have to learn how to communicate and like update effectively. And we never really learned that. Like, there's no best practice there. So, yeah, anyways, Dmitrii, any recommendation for individual contributors?
Yeah, like Sabrina said, that the whole personal work-life balance is just crucial. Nobody's going to be able to thrive if they're unhappy in both, or unhappy in one or the other for that matter. And as an individual contributor, I think it is important to be open with your manager, hopefully with your manager being receptive of that openness, because as the individual contributor, if you're not open, that you might have something that's causing issues at home or just in life, anything outside of work, or at work for that matter, they can't take any steps to try helping you if they're the ones that are there, if they can help you for that matter. And especially if it is a work-life balance, it is the manager's role to ensure that the employees are comfortable and happy with their work and the environment. And if working from home doesn't work, then and going into the office is not an option, I've heard plenty of people work through setups with their managers where they can go to cooperative workspaces, like WeWork or something of that type of sort, where there is a social aspect to going into the office. And suddenly we're all thrown into, go sit in this potentially just your bedroom, on your laptop, wherever you have this quiet space, and continue doing the same level of work you were doing before, all the while trying to navigate. I have nobody to talk to anymore. My dog doesn't speak anything.
Right.
Yeah, it's so wild how we were just expected to do this, and somehow we did it, but clearly there's challenges, right? So thank you. That was well summarized. So Dmitrii, thank you so much for spending the time with us today. So many great nuggets. Before we go, please let our audience know any projects that you're working on that you want to share, or where they can find you.
You can find me at Miromatrix. Love to share about the company. We are a thriving, smaller bioengineering company out of Eden Prairie, Minnesota. The company mission is to end the organ transplant waiting list. And we are focusing on kidneys and livers, with our first product being a extracorporeal assist liver product, where it's this effectively something like dialysis that's used for kidneys, except it's a dialysis for people with acute liver failure. And it's, instead of using a mechanical filter like they would in kidney dialysis, it uses a live biologic. And by that, I mean, it uses an actual liver instead of a mechanical filter to do the outside of the body filtration and function for that person in acute liver failure.
Wow,
That's incredible.
That is so cool. Yeah, I thought my company had a good mission, but that's, speaking of mission, wow, that's super inspiring. Yes, please follow along. Ending the organ transplant list, you said?
Organ transplant waiting list. Yep.
Waiting list, that's right.
Just a fun, well, not fun fact, it's actually a very sad fact. There's, just in the United States alone, there's about 110,000 people on the organ transplant waiting list. And roughly 90% of those people are waiting for a kidney or liver.
Oh,
And so that's why the focus on our company for focusing on kidneys and livers is that does have the biggest impact on the wait list. Obviously, it's anybody with any other issues is just as important, but these first steps with the biggest impact are addressing kidneys and livers.
Wow, fascinating. Well, thank you for all you do and your company. Pretty amazing. So we're wrapping up. Dear listeners, if one of you is also a manager managing in a remote world, or if you're an IC, that individual contributor that has struggled in this transition, we also want to hear from you. And you can always reach us at whereisthelinepod@gmail.com. And of course, please subscribe and rate our podcast wherever you listen to. We are on Apple, Spotify, and Google. And with that, everyone, have a great day, and thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.